You have to have what I teach is that magnetic north, that thing that's going to keep pulling you, a mission, a passion that will help you push through uncomfortable things. If you were advising somebody who is ADHD and they're in a corporate job and they're considering jumping into it, what would your advice be to them?
So the biggest thing to me was, and still is, two things. One, a problem that you're absolutely obsessed over. You see a solution that you just have to get out in the world because there are so many down days that you need that anchor point that pull you back up. The second thing.
At what point in your life did you become aware that you had ADHD?
Just here in the last, call it 2 years. And it wasn't my journey, it was my son's.
You're in an entrepreneurial situation now. You have to create all the structure and then you have your ADHD. So what's working for you right now?
I saw this whole world of problems and challenges.
Judson Armentrout is the founder and principal consultant at Building Block Solutions and former coordinator for case-ready fresh meats at Kroger. With 30 plus years in fresh food operations, he's pioneered RFID cattle tracking, optimized case-ready operations, and led one of the largest retail meat supply chains through COVID, bringing unmatched expertise to turning strategy into results.
Hey, it's Steve. Real quick before we begin. The single biggest thing I've learned about succeeding as an ADHD entrepreneur is that everything boils down to mastering your weeks. So if ADHD is making business harder than it needs to be, I've got something that can help. Grab my free weekly ADHD dashboard. It's a free, simple, but powerful tool to help you stay focused, organized, and in control of your week. The link is in the description below. Hey there, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Steve August. Welcome back to ADHD Entrepreneur Accelerator. And I am excited again today because we have another amazing guest. You know, one of the things that I really love about working with ADHD entrepreneurs and running the ADHD Entrepreneur Accelerator is just the fascinating array of things that people are working on and how much I learn about how things happen in the world that sometimes we take for granted that are actually, there's a lot going on to make it happen. And our guest today is a perfect example of that. So Judson Armentrout is someone I've gotten to know over the last 6 months as a member of the ADHD Entrepreneur Accelerator and as an awesome human. He spent 25 years in fresh food ops before starting Building Block Solutions. He's worked everywhere from plant floors, boardrooms, helping some of the biggest names in protein and grocery cut costs, roll out tech, and grow across multiple channels. By 30, he had helped to develop RFID cattle tracking programs, optimized early case-ready operations, and built a citrus-to-box traceability solution. Since then, cold chain programs, seafood inspections, and one of the most efficient case-ready facilities in the U.S., and running one of the biggest retail meat supply chains through COVID. You won't find someone with a broader experience across the fresh food supply chain. That's what's really fascinating about this. We go to the grocery store and we just expect the food to be there, the fresh food, whether it's meat or citrus or whatever it happens to be. It just sort of magically appears, but there's people like Judson who are making that happen. And so he started Building Block Solutions to help companies actually get these kind of things done. And not just sit through strategy presentations, but actually make this stuff happen more efficiently so that everybody wins. So the product gets to the shelves and we get to enjoy it. And it is a pleasure to welcome Judson Armentrout here to the podcast. Judson, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be a part of this. It's kind of weird hearing you read off my bio.
Yeah, I've had that experience too, where you come in and you're like, wow, I didn't realize that was that awesome, or am I really that awesome, or whatever. But you know, it sounds like we're just reciting things that have happened and that you've made happen. And as I said, it's sort of like, wow, we take, so many people just take for granted that food shows up to the grocery store and it's the right quality and it's the right, price and all the things that take to get it to show up. So it's amazing. I'm really keen to hear more about it. Where in the world do we find you today?
So I'm based in Cincinnati, Ohio. Being a former Kroger employee, that was, once I left, that was no desire to move from there. More specifically, the Capital One Cafe in the Kenwood Mall. With it being summer, my kids are at home. and I don't have an office with a door. So I kind of bounce around in the summer as a nomad.
It's fascinating you say that because, a lot of the folks that work with our parents, and summer is a different season, on so many different levels, because the kids are home from school, and the whole distraction thing becomes a very different ball game when the kids are kind of constantly traipsing through the house, and so it's kind of cool that I've seen those Capital One cafes. I haven't worked at them, but they seem like a really good idea. Is Capital One actually your bank that you use, or is you just like, hey, they got a cafe, I'm gonna go in here?
I actually do have my REI credit card is with them. So, this keeps me out of REI.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I'm not shilling. I have no interest in Capital One, but I use them as well. Their Spark business. I've been on that for a while. But great. Well, tell me about your journey. I mean, we learned a little bit about it, but how did you get into this in the first place? Like, how do you go from, going to school and, get an education to suddenly you're in helping food show up?
So I actually grew up around the agricultural industry. Grew up in Georgia. My dad grew up on a farm in Virginia that he still owns to this day, that his parents had had. So from a very young age, I'd been around cattle. He and my grandfather partnered and bought a feedlot in Iowa when I was a kid. So if you can imagine the distance from Georgia to Iowa, the far west end of Iowa is 1,000 miles. So from the time I was 10 till about 15, every summer we got loaded up to go work on the feedlot during the summer. So ride pens, build fence, work cattle, and one Nintendo Game Boy. That was our sole entertainment. So did that, and then went to Georgia Tech, studied industrial engineering, and while I was there, my dad and some others actually started one of the first RFID traceability companies for cattle in the late 90s. So I was like employee number 11, I think, while I was in college, because I was cheap. I was getting paid, I think, $10 an hour to do software QA and also field sales, and spent the summer before my senior year of college. My brother just graduated high school, so my dad bought us a truck and said, hit the road. So he and I together bounced around Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, South Dakota, going into ranches, feedlots, packing plants, whatever needed to be done for the company. So that was 5 straight weeks at 20, 21 years old, having that type of responsibility. So that experience put me into multiple beef packing plants. So when I was looking for a job, when I was finishing up at Tech, I looked at some other things, and then there was a job posting with IBP. And this was back in the early days of like monster.com job boards. So that was kind of my way that I was looking for jobs, because I didn't figure out and understand networking at the time, and wound up talking to IBP, which at the time was the nation's largest beef and pork producer. And they had a job in Gillettsville, Tennessee. And so I asked about that, and they're like, well, we filled that one, but we have Amarillo, Texas. It's like, okay. And, interviewed. And it was kind of funny because the recruiter tried to explain the environment. I was like, well, I know the environment. Like, I've been in several of your plants. I know what I'm getting into. Because that's always the biggest challenge for them, because it's not exactly a real clean environment where you're harvesting cattle or pigs. So, wound up going out, interviewing with the director of industrial engineering and getting hired in there. And what I joke, I took the job because I could wear blue jeans every day, and I had a $10 million capital budget for the plant. And to me, those were like the two coolest things right out of college. What I got was a world-class education in operations, because IBP, we measured everything. It's critical, and you're a commodity producer in a volume game. And so I did 2 years in Amarillo, and then during my performance review, I again asked about Gillettsville, Tennessee, because that was closer to home. And they said, yeah, Gillettsville isn't open, but Council Bluffs, Iowa is. So I moved to Council Bluffs, Iowa, and that was our Case Ready division. So Case Ready at the time, this was 2002.
And can you explain to folks what case ready means, just so folks who aren't familiar with the terminology?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the time, we only really had one customer, which is Walmart. And so Walmart had taken all of the meat cutters out of their stores and said, we want everything brought in pre-cut and packaged. So that's what our plant did. We brought in the large pieces that you would had traditionally sent to a grocery store and had the meat cutter cut them into trays or cut them into steaks or pork chops and put them in trays. And instead, we were doing it at our plant and shipping it to Walmart. We had only just gotten into that about 2 years before I got there. So it was a very big shift operationally for the plant team because they all knew one method of production, which is a single chain that sets speed for everything. And now we moved to all of these different production lines that functioned independently. So for the operations team, they were really struggling trying to run the plant the old way. And I came in because I saw the world very differently. I started getting people to see the way I saw it. And we very quickly improved our plant profitability. When I came in 2002, a great week, that plant made $360,000 in profit. And we weren't hitting that number very often. So when we did, it was a celebration. When I left 3 years later, 750,000 was a bad week.
Twice of what they started with was a bad week.
Yeah, that was one of those areas where my mindset and now I can look back and see how ADD was helping me because I could sit there and envision things and see things and focus on things differently from how everybody else was. So that was kind of the first part of my career, first 5 years. The plant ran 7 days a week. I was working 6 and eventually decided, and I was living in Iowa. And if you haven't been in Iowa, it snows a lot. It snows about 36 inches every winter. And I grew up in Georgia. We don't do snow. So after 3 years of that, and what I joked that my realization was the day I woke up and turned on the TV and did not think that they would cancel work because of the weather or have that hope, then I was like, nope, time to move. So I left, went to graduate school at UNC Chapel Hill, got my MBA focused on supply chain management and marketing, and met my wife while I was there. So I can never say that was a bad decision.
Yeah, no, best decision you've ever made, most likely.
Exactly. Did some work back in the traceability space. So did some consulting work where they had me design a traceability system to track oranges from the citrus grove all the way into the box. You need that for pesticide records and things and where you can ship fruit globally. After grad school, worked for another tech startup doing traceability work for 2 years. And then eventually followed my wife to Cincinnati because she went to work for Procter & Gamble and landed at Kroger. And so at Kroger, who's headquartered in Cincinnati, my first 4 years were spent in fresh supply chain, so all special projects type work. The way I describe it, Kroger treated me as a professional fixer. They would just point at a problem and say, we don't know, go figure it out. And I just love that kind of ambiguity and problem solving, things completely random where it was, hey, you have 72 hours to go figure out how to do a DSD program because 4th of July volume is going to shut down our entire distribution network in the West Coast. So you have 72 hours to go put together a program and take volume out. And whenever I get these types of assignments, I would look at my boss and ask, how much time do people would we normally spend on this? And he'd be like, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, you get 3 days.
Wow.
But again, the ADD thing coming in handy, I love that type stuff because it was high pressure, short term. I can look back later and then see the dopamine crashes that happened after the fact. But I didn't understand that part at the time. So did all that and then got recruited into the meat department to build and manage the Case Ready network, like what I had done for Tyson, but at a much larger scale. So that came in, it was 14 plants. When I left, it was 17, producing those same type products. So prepackaged steaks, pork chops, ground beef, hamburger patties for Kroger stores across the country. So Kroger in the East, and then you get all the Kroger banners in the West. So King Soopers, Fred Meyer, Ralph's, Fry's, Smith's, QFC. And that wound up, it was a $1.5 billion retail supply chain. And I owned everything from raw material quality coming in to those plants to finished product quality on shelf.
You fed a lot of people.
Yeah. I have fed millions of people and very proud of that fact and the teams that I worked with to do that. And then, with Kroger, it got to the point where they said, hey, we don't want you to keep changing and iterating. We just want what you built to just run on time. And I had told them even early on in that journey, when I took the job originally, I said, I'll do 5 years and then I'll evaluate. And one of the responsibilities was building a plant from greenfield. And that was a $92 million project. And that one took 5 years just to get it opened. Yeah, so I wound up staying 9.5 total. And it was about year two that I had the conversation with my boss at the time and said, I know when you just want the trains to run on time, I'm not the person to do this anymore. I was like, I'm designed to build and create and solve problems. And once you tell me to stop doing that, I need to move on. Otherwise, I'll get destructive. Kind of like the dog that doesn't get enough energy burned off. So, it kind of, reached that point just over 2 years ago that I left to start building blocks. Because what I saw, and the reason I even considered going down this path, during my time at Kroger, I worked with 5 major consulting firms, and they each came in, and it was the same type of people every time, which are the same type of people that I knew and had the same background, went to school, and then I got an MBA, and they're working as analysts or junior consultants, whatever, but they weren't adding any value to what we were doing, because our world, especially in fresh food and fresh meat specifically, is very specialized. Equipment, processes, food safety regulations, the fact that every cow is different, and how you adjust for that. So, I saw this whole world of problems and challenges, and you had a couple people who were, hey, I've been doing this for 40 years, and yeah, you can hire me and I'll talk to you about it, but I don't actually want to do it anymore. And I'm sitting here going, I love the problems. Like, I love the challenges and, being able to solve these problems and then leave, because I don't want to, sit here and hang out around your company and deal with corporate politics. I was like, I'm great. You drop me in, let me solve your problem, and then let me leave. And, so that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years now, and love it. I mean, I have friends at Kroger who asked me, they're like, do you regret leaving? And I was like, well, as an entrepreneur, I honestly have no idea where my next paycheck's coming from. I have long periods of downtime and doubt and everything else. And I'll look at them and smile and just go, but compared to how I was at Kroger, I'm doing great. I didn't realize, how much stress Kroger was putting me under, with just constant demands, being on call all the time, and, just the wear down that I was going through. But I was like, no, I love the freedom and the autonomy. That's what I was craving. And I lasted as long as I did in my role in the meat department, because for a long period of time, they let me run it like a startup. I had the freedom and the autonomy to go when I needed and travel, and not be held to, no, you need to be at your desk from these hours to these hours, because I can't work that way.
So yeah, it's really fascinating how everything unfolded. Because, and I want to get deeper into your own journey with ADHD. But one of the things that when I hear from a lot of folks who are in corporate jobs that have responded to some of my content or have seen the podcast, is they're really in that decision point of like, I can tell that this environment isn't right for me anymore. And now that they have a little bit of understanding of their ADHD brain, and they're trying to figure out what's the thing how do they decide to make the jump? So if you were advising somebody who is ADHD and they're in a corporate job, like, and they're considering jumping into it, what would your advice be to them?
So the biggest thing to me was, and still is, two things. One, a problem that you're absolutely obsessed over, and you see a solution that you just have to get out in the world, because there are so many down days that you need that anchor point that pull you back up. The second thing for me, with the realization, 200 emails a day, and all these different demands, get pulled into meetings at last minute, and you don't get to something. Well, in a corporate job, you're still going to get paid. But as an entrepreneur, and I've had to have this conversation with, my kids and some of my friends, because they're like, well, why are you working right now? It's like, well, if I don't do this, I don't get paid. It's much more important. So, family vacations, things, my wife and I have worked out a rhythm because she's also an entrepreneur on her own journey. So a dual startup household is definitely not what I'd ever recommend to anybody. You have to figure out the rhythms and the things to keep you on task with certain things. And that was never a strong suit for me. And I know you and I've had some conversations, Steve, in the past about organizational methods, and I can look back and I'm like, companies kept trying to put me through all those things. And every one of them, as soon as the shiny object wore off, it went out in the trash. So trying to figure out a methodology and a process, and really it's kind of been my own thing, taking somebody else's and modifying it to a way that works for me. And even then, I still don't hold hard and fast to the rules that I tried to put in place. But it's having the rhythms and things to make sure that I stay on task so that I'm not having to work 15-hour days to try to keep my head above water.
I think that's, something that you said really, really resonated for me was that you have to have, what I teach is that magnetic north, that thing that's going to keep pulling you, a mission, a passion that will help you push through, uncomfortable things like putting yourself out there, doing a sales call, reaching out to people, or just, dealing with what it is to create a business, which is there are times when you have awesome wins, and there's also all the time, all the different things that led up to that win, which don't feel quite as good. That there you try a lot of stuff and some of it works and some of it doesn't. So I think that was a really a point well taken. So, well, let's talk a little bit about your journey with ADHD. So at what point in your life did you become aware that you had ADHD?
So really only just here in the last, call it 2 years, and it wasn't my journey, it was my son's. We were going through that. He'll be 13 next month. And, very smart kid, could never get homework turned in, couldn't sit still, not a hyperactive kid at any stretch, but just constantly fidgeting, couldn't remember things. The joke about him was he actually opened the refrigerator, got a glass out, fixed his drink, walked away with the refrigerator door open, the carton still on the counter, and his drink still on the counter untouched. Like just completely forgot what he was doing. And, so we kind of went down the path with him. And as we were going through that path, everybody that we met with, as they were describing things, my wife just kept looking right at me and just going, that's you, that's you, that's you. Kind of realized as we were going through it, and I was like, oh, yeah. Now I don't take medication. I figured out coping mechanisms and different ways to work, but I was like, oh, that's why the running joke in my family, I can cram a 40-hour week into 8 hours starting early Friday morning. You know, just let the pressure build up and then, rip and roar and then crash. The whole concept around, not understanding time, time blindness. It's either now or not now. And, those type things where it was like, oh, so all of those things as we were going through his journey helped me start better understanding myself. And then when I started engaging with your content, it was like, oh, now things are clicking, and why I could go through these down phases after a project. And like it would be 3 or 4 days of just like nothing will engage with me. And just recognizing like those crashes and things, which have helped me now because it's like, okay, I hit a big milestone, whether that's, finishing a client presentation or, landing a new client, whatever. I know the next day I need to go hiking, snowboarding, something outside that is completely different to help my mind reset because it had been so focused on a goal and I wasn't celebrating the accomplishment. I was just crashing. And that I struggled with. And I struggled with that for a long time, trying to understand why, like, and I know you'd written an article about like, we should be happy we did this thing. And instead I'm miserable. And part of it for me is recognizing, well, I finished solving the problem. And now my mind's saying, go find a new problem.
Everything that just happened, yeah, is gone, right? Because now and not now, it's like, yeah, well, you lose the credit so quickly. You lose that because it's out of sight, out of mind, and all of a sudden your brain's like gets so used to being in that set that it starts to feel like down because one, you've dropped on the dopamine front, but also you're just like, oh, I just worked my tail off, and now I have to go figure out a way to work my tail off again without the recovery having taken the time to recover.
Yeah, so things like that have been, for me, very helpful. Also recognizing the attention and, having to learn, turn off all the notifications on my phone, put it into do not disturb, and really figuring out what does focus look like. Because when I was at Kroger, my wife joked one time, one of the vice presidents I worked for, we were at a baseball game. They're at a Reds game, and it was her first time meeting him. And the two of them got to talking, and she makes the comment, I always thought it would be funny to go into the meat department and make a complaint and see how long it takes till Judson's phone goes off. And the two of them are laughing about it. And I look at it, I was like, that's not funny because that's happening to me. Like I have a division president that walks into a store, sees a bad package, and 20 minutes later, my phone's going off with a picture of the package and what are you going to do about this? And it was not appropriate to respond, jump up and down and celebrate because I had 9,999 that were really good that you didn't have an issue with. So learning, those distractions and those things that would pull my attention, because at Kroger, I didn't think about it because again, it didn't matter if I got to something or not. Like if I really needed to focus, okay, I would go hide somewhere and focus on it. But I wasn't under the same type of pressure in terms of I need to focus because I need to deliver because my clients are expecting that. And if I don't deliver, I don't get paid. So that part of the entrepreneurial side and the ADD side of figuring out, okay, how do these two coexist? Because my mind can run very quickly to figure out and start coming up with solutions and strategies and everything else. But it's making sure that it stays in that world and not ding, phone goes off. I need to go look at that.
So what, if you were to say what's working for you right now to help, like what do you find to be the most effective things in, balancing, you're in an entrepreneurial situation now, so you have to create all the structure, right? And then you have your ADHD. So what's working for you right now?
So a couple things that I go through. One is when I sit down in the morning and then when I finish my day, I use Trello for a daily dashboard. So, I've got my list of this week, next week on the horizon. And, for me, it's looking at that list and saying, okay, here's everything I'm going to get done today or that I want to get done today. Checking stuff off, moving it over. Everything for tomorrow, getting that moved over so that I know here's the things I need to work on. Because for me, if I go into the day completely unstructured and it's a lot of white space, the white space gets filled with other stuff. The co-working sessions that you run have been great for me when I need them, because there's been times when I can't focus on something. And then I look at my watch and I was like, oh, co-working starts in 15 minutes. I'm going to force myself to work on this in there. And then it's like my mind just clicks on and goes, oh yeah, time to work. And so that can be a very good thing to reset. And then the other thing is taking a lot of the distractions off my phone. Although I figured out a way to cheat, I got to take it back off again. Solitaire, I just got to get that one off. That's kind of my default mess around game. Yeah, there's always something. And it's interesting, part of the ADD with my son, he will not go anywhere without at least 3 books. Won't go in the car, won't go anywhere. And we went to the amusement park last night and he takes a book with him. And he did one ride and the rest of the time he's like, oh, I'm just going to sit here and read, because that's his coping mechanism to just go and, he quiets out the world and he can read the same book multiple times without an issue. But, trying to find those things. And then it's that distraction. For me, it's the distraction. So it's when I work and I need to focus, I just use green noise to tune out the world. I used to do the same thing at Kroger. I would use music on my phone, but now I've learned green noise helps me focus even better. Music will work for certain things because I used to use my same playlist. So it's like I'm not paying attention because I know all the words. But anything new would cause me to kind of like pause and think. it's been an interesting journey. And my son's now reading a couple of the books we had gotten to, and he's actually commented, hey, those books that you got, those are helping me understand my brain. And, some of the things you've written, I've kind of taken and shared bits and pieces with both my wife and with him as we're all three trying to figure out how to navigate this. Even once I kind of realized it and he was diagnosed, I look back at my mom and go, oh, shoot. Oh, yeah, she absolutely has it. Because I was like, I just thought everything was learned behavior. And then I'm realizing, oh, no, I got it from her. Like, that's how her mind is wired, and mine's very similar. And then my son's absolutely wired like me.
Gifts of genetics, I suppose. So you've been part of the accelerator, I think, for 6 months now, and I would just love to hear, what's been helpful, like in the experience, and if you had to share with somebody like why you're there and what help it's been giving you, what would you tell people?
A few things. One, by the time I came to you, I was about 18 months in, and I had pivoted a couple times, and I was trying to figure out really how to find a message that resonates, because I can see the problems, and how I was talking about it wasn't necessarily resonating with potential clients, because they just weren't seeing it as a problem.
Mhm.
And the program really helped me kind of build structure around that and keep kind of refining it. And actually, the last couple of clients that I've signed that have been, some of my biggest ones, as I shared with them, I was like, look, I'm disruptive. My ideas were going to disrupt things, and that's not for everybody. And both of them looked at different times in the conversations, both of them looked at me like, that's what we want. Like,
Right.
we don't want to keep going down the same path. We want disruption. And, recognizing that's not for everybody. But that's language that resonates with my target.
Hmm.
So figuring out how to work that into the messaging, having the opportunities to ask questions of the group and during office hours and get, hear different perspectives and different challenges. In a lot of cases, as the folks were talking and realizing, okay, I'm 3, 4, 5 steps behind you, but it's good for me to see the types of challenges I'm going to face in the future as I try to continue to grow this business. Because long term, I don't want to be just on my own. I want to be able, there's folks that I know that would be great at the work and don't want to deal with the politics anymore, but they want a little bit more stability than what I have.
Yeah.
So they're not aching to jump out on their own. Those type of things, and then the different learning sessions month to month. Some of those have been incredibly valuable to me. One of them, being the actually hired a VA. She started on Monday,
Right.
so learning, and it's a process, and I have to keep reminding myself because I'm so used to doing everything, handing things off and saying, no, you're responsible for this. And then continue to teach because again, in my mind, everything's saved in the inbox because then I could see it. I was like, no, that's not the way to live. And, just even as we've kind of gone through my email every day this week, and it's like, okay, well, this teaching how to sort things and how to think about different aspects of it. And realizing, oh, there are really only like 6 emails I should be responding to. But I had all this other noise coming in, and have to be very diligent about, in the corporate world, getting added to meetings and everything else makes you look busy.
Hmm.
And looking busy as an entrepreneur does not pay the bills.
No.
So it's figuring out what's busy work and what's real value, sorting out between those two.
Yeah, and that's the the huge thing about the way we blend the ADHD support and the business support is that notion of like what is impactful, what is going to be impactful, what's going to be your rocks that are going to be the most important things that are going to move you forward, and then how do we get out of ADHD brains tend to be very reactive, right? We're reactive to things outside of in the world, and our brains constantly churning ideas. So we're reactive to those too. So how do we get into that proactivity where it's where the big levers get pulled and where compounding progress happens, and we're not just like constantly cleaning up and doing stuff that is useful but not impactful. So Yeah, I'm glad that that's been having that impact for you. So, if somebody's interested in working with you or learning more about you, where should they go to find you?
Company website is buildingblock.solutions. If you're in the fresh protein space, seafood, retail, that's where all of our work is. You can also follow me on LinkedIn under Judson Armentrout. And, I do publish a biweekly newsletter called Fresh Ops, again, talking about meat, seafood, grocery from an operations and a retail perspective. So those are the spaces I'm in right now. I am in hopefully working with one of the larger trade publications in our industry to figure out some ways to partner, which will be completely awesome to be able to get my content out to a broader audience. But nothing as of yet that I can share.
Okay. Well, we'll look forward to it when it happens. Judson, it's been amazing talking with you today. I really appreciate you sharing your story and really appreciate you on that level of like one of the points of the podcast or the mission is to have the conversation, to be able to have the conversation about being an entrepreneur with ADHD. And so I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking about your journey and the things that have been working for you and sharing your experiences. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. It's an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Well, that's our episode for today. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a like, give us some reviews, give me some stars. I'll take everything we can get as we want to grow this and make this something that is really helpful for anybody who is ADHD and wanting to lead their own business. That's it for today, and we'll see you soon.